Scott, why do you think young men are having less sex?
The most well-resourced, brightest people in the world are trying to convince young men they can have a reasonable facsimile of life online. You don't need friends. Go on Reddit or Discord. You don't need to go through the bullshit of trying to find a job. Just trade stocks and crypto on Robinhood and Coinbase. And you don't need to go through the aggravation, the effort, the rejection, the humiliation sometimes, the effort. Learn how to be funny, learn how to be smart, shower for God's sakes, work out, dress well, show up to things, of trying to get a romantic partner when you have YouPorn. So I think a lot of men are just opting out of the dating scene. In addition, there's some societal factors. Men are going more conservative. Women are going more progressive, which creates another reason why they don't want to date or don't like each other. I've said to you in my 20s and 30s, I, for the life of me, can't remember the political affiliation of anyone I dated. Now it's just another reason why people don't date. I think online dating creates this portion of polygamy where 80% of women want the same 10% of guys, which kind of blocks out the bottom 90. So I think there's a lot of wins in the face of a young man who is trying to find a relationship that ultimately involves sex. And you see it everywhere. The number 1 out of 5 men you walk by under the age of 30 on the street hasn't had sex in a year. And people hear sex and their brain goes different places. It's a key step to forming the most important thing in life, and that is a loving, secure relationship.
Welcome to First Time Founders. I'm Ed Elson. 30 years ago, 152 million men worldwide struggled with erectile dysfunction. Today, that number has doubled, and it's not just older men who are affected. More than a quarter of men under the age of 40 experience ED. With over $1 billion spent each year on ED treatments, many men rely on medication. But after dealing with these issues firsthand, my next guest was determined to find a better long-term solution. And so together with his cousin, he created an app filled with resources from psychologists, urologists, and physiotherapists designed to help men address their issues naturally. Since launching in 2020, the app has helped over 700,000 men improve their sexual well-being and has fostered a community that's breaking the stigma around discussing intimate health issues. This is my conversation with Angus Barge, co-founder and CEO of Mojo. Angus, thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
So we're going to talk about Mojo, what the company is and what it does, but I think the place to start is how you came up with this idea, because I think it is really important. So just quickly tell us the origin story of Mojo. How did this all begin?
That is a question I often get, and people react differently as I kind of stare them down the barrel and tell them what the business does. The business idea came from a long car journey with my cousin, actually. I think I had one of those moments when in the car with him that your mouth just starts moving, your brain hasn't really engaged with what it was saying. And kind of looking very far out the passenger window, I basically told him that as like fit, healthy 28-year-old who'd never had any issues, suddenly I was struggling to get it up in bed. And I think kind of understandably was withdrawing from dating. I was single at the time, loved going out, loved meeting people. And it felt kind of understandable that I'd withdrawn from that. Yeah. But also noticing that I was having kind of withdrawals from my social confidence as well. Like I'm a big extrovert, love going out, love seeing my mates, and found that I was almost hermiting there and losing self-confidence. So I think what I told him was basically for those 6 months, I'd been as close to like a mental health crisis as I'd ever been for this seemingly small part of my life. He paused long enough that I kind of wished the car had like imploded and been swallowed up by the road. And then he said, you know what, screw it. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about. He'd been struggling on and off throughout his 20s with performance anxiety. And I think in that moment, we had a conversation that not many people or not many men would have had. And it was like, pat on the back, well done us. We've had this kind of vulnerable conversation, and you start laughing about all the stupid stuff you tell each other, like, or you tell yourself in your head, like, I'm never going to get married, no one's ever going to love me, all this kind of stuff. And I think that would have been the end of it. I don't think we would have taken it any further had that not been basically to the month that we saw the kind of real power of venture capital money in London, and I'm sure you guys had the same in New York, but like every bus and every tube was covered in this new message, which was sexual issues aren't just for old guys, they're for young guys too, and you should be the best partner you can be, and you should just take pills. And it felt kind of instinctive to us that we knew that medication wasn't what we needed, and it wasn't what was wrong with us. It didn't feel like it was physical. So we kind of disregarded that and thought, well, if that's not the real solution, if guys shouldn't be taking medications like Viagra, then what is the solution? And we very quickly found out it's a very small and niche profession called sex therapy. Very small and niche to the extent that there's like 400-500 sex therapists in the whole of the UK. And one of them actually happened to be my mum.
Oh, wow.
So having had a really awkward conversation with my cousin in the car that day, kind of 2-3 weeks later, when this idea just kept coming back to us and kept niggling, I was kind of set up for a second awkward conversation with my mum. But I think it shows that this is a very small niche industry that not many people know kind of even what it does, by the fact that I struggled for a year and didn't realize that it was what I needed.
Yeah, I think this story is going to resonate with a lot of young men. And, I can actually prove this statistically because the prevalence of erectile dysfunction is just growing rapidly, not just in America, but all over the world among young men specifically. And according to the Journal of Sexual Medicine, 26% of men under the age of 40 today struggle with erectile dysfunction. So that's 1 in 4 young men. So this is a massive issue that is getting worse. Anecdotally, we have the evidence that you just described of, being in the car and then seeing all these ads telling people you should take Viagra and Cialis and all of these ED pills, but also we're just seeing it in the data, 1 in 4 young men. So, you've been studying this for a long time. Why is this happening? Why are seemingly healthy young men struggling to get it up?
Yeah, and I think the stat you just spoke about as well is kind of erectile dysfunction, which is like defined in the DSM or like the manual for statistics as this kind of healthcare condition. But kind of one step back from that, like actually lots of young men aren't struggling from erectile dysfunction. That's like a convenient name that makes people think they need medication to fix it. What they're quite often struggling with is performance anxiety, like going through bouts of not being able to get it up and kind of these psychological seeds of doubt. And that's actually far more prevalent than 1 in 4. So I think the kind of first data we really see is that in 1999, like 3 to 5% of guys under the age of 40 were struggling with erection issues. And then by 2011, you start to see studies coming out there's like 30% of guys under the age of 30. So just this huge shift in demographic who are struggling. I'd put some of that down to people more openly reporting it, with companies like Pfizer making drugs available and it becoming more understood. There'll be a little bit of a reporting, but certainly just an absolute boom in the space and the issue. I think lots of people have quite kind of, they like to come up with simplistic views of that. They look at that kind of decade and quite a few people will jump to, oh, well, that's when the porn sites and the streaming sites really came onto the scene. Yep. And it's quite, a nefarious industry, which is easy to give a kicking and lots of people love to get on board with it. Not ruling porn out and saying that hasn't had an impact, but there's plenty of studies as well in sexology research that says there's kind of a correlation with porn use, no causation. It gives you kind of unrealistic expectations of as much yourself as your partner, and that can really set you up for failure. But this whole idea that there's like a hijacking of your dopamine system is kind of pseudoscience at best.
I'm one of the people who believes that porn is probably having a bad effect on young men. And the statistics that I am aware of are that 70% of American men view porn regularly and 10% of them say they are addicted. And that's all men. So I would assume that among young men, the statistics are a lot higher. You mentioned there's correlation versus causation. I'm not fully sold. I kind of still believe that porn must play a role in this.
Absolutely. And I think by saying there is correlation, it's certainly having an impact. And I'm not here kind of holding a torch saying the porn is good and everyone should be taking part and it's going to suit everyone. But I think what you do see with porn, and when you actually dig down into it, there's a real shame element around sex and your erotic template. And almost that is the sticking point, which kind of anchors you into porn. The term porn addiction actually isn't widely recognized in the expert field.
So it isn't porn. What is it then?
With kind of zooming into that decade, I think one thing that people forget is kind of our whole lives were turned upside down from 2011. Everything went online, the way we work, communicate, date. We kind of suddenly became chronically online in some way. And I think in that decade, we saw kind of the emergence of the most anxious human beings ever to have walked the planet. So I think it would be too much to hang the blame on one sector. It just seems to be a kind of direction of travel. You could now say that 50% of millennials and Gen Z will struggle with some form of psychosexual issue. And for me, that's really just a kind of physical manifestation of there being something much more dangerous underneath that. For me, I think I actually label it on kind of loneliness and disconnection, which is we're the most social animals ever to have walked the planet. And that's kind of why we're here. And for me, I think we've now gone for so long where community and connections are kind of breaking down in a way that now it's got to breaking point and it's turning up in kind of, like I say, these physical manifestations of we can't actually physically connect anymore. So yeah, kind of if you get me excited and I'm holding court and giving wax lyrical about where this all really begins, I think you can map it back to like the agricultural revolution. Bear with me.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, that was the first time, if you think we were in these nomadic tribes and we were kind of, the man beside you was your ally in the hunt. You kind of take it into the agricultural revolution and suddenly the land you own becomes very important, and therefore the family you have becomes very important because your livelihood relies on it. So you kind of have this idea of ownership and this civilization brought into this kind of competitive nature between people, where actually I now think we're seeing repercussions of that slowly the kind of connections that we were used to for millennia have now broken down ever since.
In sum, we don't know how to interact with people. I mean, I think the amount of time that we're spending with our friends is down around 70% in the past decade. I think the most important number is 12%, and that's the share of Americans who say they have no close friends at all. That's up from 3% in 1990.
Yeah, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
I mean, it feels as though this is all downstream of the loneliness issue. And I think there's another important point that you're making there. I think in the past, we've talked about sexual dysfunction, erectile dysfunction as sort of a physical problem, or at least some sort of vascular problem. But it sounds like what you're saying is that actually this all begins in our heads.
Yeah, there was a study, again, we're talking specifically about erection issues here, but things like premature ejaculation is another kind of very common issue that guys face. But yeah, in erection issues, they did a study where kind of in guys under 40 who are struggling, for 85% of them, it's totally psychological. Wow. There's no what you call organic element to that, which means that you can rule out things like testosterone or cardiac problems or fitness. Like it is all psychological. And then when you start to understand how the drugs like Cialis, Viagra, Sildenafil work, the only way they work for these men is through a placebo effect.
Oh, interesting. How do we know that? I assumed that, Viagra and Cialis, they just have a cellular effect on your penis.
They do have an effect on the body, but I think if I explain to you what performance anxiety is, it starts to make sense, which is when you're struggling with performance anxiety or psychological erection issues, basically you're in a state of fight or flight. Your body is scared, it's getting ready to run away or fight. In those instances, your body sends all the blood it can to your skeletal muscles and your brain. And that means it goes away from your digestive organs and your genitals, because those parts of your body are just not needed when you're about to fight a saber-toothed tiger. And what all of these drugs, they're called PDE5s, that's the umbrella term for them, that all they do is two things. They widen all your blood vessels. So they're a vasodilator. It means you will blush, you get headaches, you get all the kind of side effects come from that vasodilation. And the second thing they do is they block what's called a PDE5 enzyme, which is naturally secreted at the end of sex to allow blood out of your genitals. So if you think a guy in fight or flight, no blood is going to his penis, whether the blood vessels there are wide or not. The only reason it then works for him is because you take a Viagra and you think, oh, great, like I'm on for tonight. Yeah. This is going to be good. I'm on my A game here. I'm relaxed. I don't go into fight or flight, and it does work. And yeah, like he'll get a great erection as well if he's a fit, healthy young guy, because there's some extra chemicals in there helping him keep all the blood in there. But the reaction starts through a placebo effect.
We'll be right back. We're back with first-time founders. So we basically have a generation of young men who, in record numbers, are getting into the bedroom, taking their clothes off, and then they suddenly start panicking. And this is happening, it sounds like, to the majority of young men in the world right now, if that's right.
And I think you saying as well that you don't believe that porn doesn't have anything to do with it. I think that's where porn does come in. Like you get in there, you take all your clothes off, you don't look like a porn star. Like you start to feel nervous and anxious about your body. That's where porn can be kind of detrimental.
So tell us where Mojo comes in. How is Mojo, the company, your company, addressing these problems?
I mean, for 4 years, we went from that conversation with my mum, and we kind of had this unfair competitive advantage where we suddenly had an incredible network of kind of Europe and America's leading experts who were really keen to work on this because so few companies were. And for the first kind of 4 years, we basically took what hides inside sex therapy rooms and digitized it. Quite unlike other forms of therapy, sex therapy is built on a foundation of exercises and techniques which have kind of been built up over the last 50 years. So the idea for us was really simple. How do we digitize them? How do we make them more accessible? How do we get rid of the barriers to entry? How do we make them low cost to be able to deliver them really scalably to everyone? So yeah, we set up an app, and the kind of message for us was, let's treat our sexual well-being the same way we do our mental and our physical well-being, which is now very common that you would invest in that on an ongoing basis. And I mean, it works incredibly well. We're really proud of the work we've done. We've got to a stage where the product is effective and can really unpick some pretty complex psychosexual issues. Like we'll have guys who have been struggling for 10, 15 years, and we're able to help them overcome that. It is, again, a kind of majority US company, 60, 70% of our user base in the US. And we now have a user base of kind of 700,000 users. Everything seemingly has gone great for the last 4 years. I think where things have got really exciting for us recently is, whilst we found that we were able to successfully digitize all of these exercises and techniques, and they could be as effective in person, one thing that we were missing is the kind of leading determiner of positive outcomes in any form of therapy, not just sex therapy, is something that's called the therapeutic alliance. So it doesn't matter if you go to a therapist and you do kind of Freudian psychodynamic, you're lying on a couch and you're talking about your childhood, or you are doing CBT and it's very much about like cognitive restructuring. They're polar opposite ends of the therapeutic spectrum. The leading factor that will determine whether you have a successful experience is what's called the therapeutic alliance. It is the relationship between you and the therapist. Do you believe they have positive regard for you? Do you believe that you're kind of in the same boat, working towards the same goal? Are they empathetic? Do you trust them? And I think that was something we were never able to deliver through the app in those first 4 years.
What did the product look like? Were you interacting with a therapist on the other side, or was it a sort of algorithm suggesting you feedback? In what sense was the therapeutic alliance missing?
So to make it scalable, our ambition has always been to have the biggest human impact we could possibly have. So we wanted this to be available. We're kind of in 150 countries at the moment. So that meant some restrictions, which is we always built for scalability. So we always did asynchronous content. We did a lot of kind of video format where we'd have experts coming on and talking about common causes of erection issues. They'd talk through their some of these exercises, and we'd actually like throw presenters in and we'd get them to go in and do the exercises, and we wouldn't really prep them. So they'd be asking kind of the stupid questions which therapists would get asked. But it was really trying to be as kind of fly on the wall as we possibly could be. But there was never that level of personalization that could have formed a therapeutic alliance. We tried to lean on things like community. So we have a really kind of vibrant community. It's anonymous, and you'll just see conversations in there that like you wouldn't believe anywhere else on the internet. I think for 3 years, I ran a session every week, which was 40, 50 users. They'd drop in, we'd do kind of group sessions. All of that was in trying to find this missing piece of the therapeutic relationship. But I don't think we were ever successful. And then I think last year, when you really started to see ChatGPT and 4.0 coming through, you started to notice that I think deep human relationships will be, if not already are, possible with AI. So yeah, at the back end of last year, we have pivoted the company, and we're now an AI coach for dating, sex, and relationships, all in the hunt of that kind of missing piece.
So it's now an AI therapist, which I think, in the past year, we've seen a lot of this, or at least we saw this coming. And I don't really know how to feel about it, because in a sense, it's a good thing, I guess, but there's something highly dystopian and freaky to me about human beings relying on an algorithm to offer them respite and therapy. So what would you say to someone like me who generally finds this a little bit frightening?
One would, I imagine some of the kickback here is quite often safety, as in the safety frameworks you have to put in place to make sure that people who are seeking help and being vulnerable are going to be safe. The rigor that you can put into that now is very kind of complex. The way we've approached it is we have a team of kind of 6 sex therapists who have been reading 100% of our conversations and annotating them all, what's appropriate, what's not, and using that to kind of train the main prompt. As you'll find with LLMs, like the longer a prompt is, the kind of more off course it can go. So the way we've also tried to counteract that is you build a safety agent in the background, which has a much smaller, tighter remit. And we're finding that is at the beginning, the kind of risk well handled was poor, and now we're finding it to be absolutely exemplary. So I'd say it's the first thing people should worry about is it is safe and can be made safe, still very much with kind of human in the loop. In terms of the dystopian idea, I think you'll see that there are AI companies which are trying to kind of promote boyfriend or girlfriend relationships, or kind of you can chat to Albert Einstein and make him your friend. That's not what we're trying to do, which is we believe that kind of the problem with society and the problem with society that's having less sex and less connection is that kind of in real life meaningful connection with others. So for us, we feel that we are able to kind of enable external relationships through the relationship with your coach or your AI therapist. It's very much an enabler. We'd never see it as a substitute. And I guess it's kind of like you wouldn't go and speak to your therapist at the weekend. Like these relationships are very much for kind of pushing you out in the world and helping you perform better. So we don't imagine a dystopian world where people are forgoing in real life relationships for what's in their phone.
Do you think it's possible that AI could be better at providing therapy than a human, or is this more about cost and scalability?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can speak from my experience of the last couple of months and watching the team build this product. As I said, for safety, we had kind of 6 therapists in reading all the conversations and kind of training the bot. And in the very first meeting we had with all of them, one of them said, "Don't worry, ladies, I think all our jobs are going to be safe." Like she was laughing at this thing. 2 weeks later, the very same therapist came back and was like, "This product is now handling conversations, backing off, leaning in better than the average therapist."
Wow, it's incredible.
I think the technology is there, and the way we've been able to train it is already there to kind of handle singular conversations. That for me isn't the therapeutic relationship, it's the beginnings of it. And now just having a team that is like absolutely obsessed with the idea of going really deep and creating a relationship over a multi-day, week, month period is the real key that we have to crack. Is not an easy one, but I for one definitely believe it's possible.
So what are some of the most common issues that your users are reporting in the bedroom?
For us, the vast majority of our users are erection issues and performance anxiety. You can kind of get down into the different users will experience it in different ways at different times. Kind of when you're losing it will tell you kind of different exercise and techniques that someone would give you. What we've looked at we're starting to work with AI and LLMs as well, is what's exciting for me is it feels like you have 24/7 user feedback on, which is they are speaking to you the whole time. And we've kind of created this content beast, which is we know exactly what the users are experiencing, what problems they want to solve. So it has meant that we've had to expand very quickly in the kind of user's job to be done that we're covering. And I think that goes into dating and relationships. It was kind of too simplistic to think of it as, oh, well, I just can't get it up, or I'm coming too quickly. When you start to get into the nuance, it might be that you have a young guy who feels like he's dependent on porn, or a guy in their 20s has just suffered with a big breakup and he's lacking confidence and doesn't know how to get back into the bedroom. Or a really common one as well is couples will start to try for a baby and suddenly sex completely changes. It's no longer about fun and connection. It's suddenly a job to perform, and it has to be an exact time, and it can be very like green light, go, go, go. And that's a real pressure situation. So like kind of dealing with that, how has that changed our relationship? So yeah, it can get a lot more nuanced now, which I'm really excited about.
What's sort of the most common type of person that is using your app and that is struggling right now?
Listen, we're a young audience. I think if you look at the average age of those really big kind of pharmacy online young brands, their average age tends to be kind of late 40s, early 50s, even though they feel very young. For us, most of our users are under the age of 30. We did a piece of research and we have this saying in the company, which is that men need to change. Like, we think we're dealing with a very high intent user base, but it's always because something in their life has changed. It's usually that they're kind of back on the dating scene and they found someone they're really excited by, but they're suddenly struggling in the bedroom and it feels really catastrophic. It's like, I need to fix this problem, otherwise I'm going to lose this person.
We'll be right back. We're back with First Time Founders. What about women's role in all of this? I mean, this is specifically designed for men. Do you ever get any feedback from women? Do you ever hear stories from women about how this issue of erectile dysfunction and just sexual dysfunction is affecting their lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite common for us to have users who have either been sent by their female partners or have kind of come to the platform, started using it for a week, and then have disappeared. And we've spoken to them when they've come back and said kind of what happened. And it's quite often, well, oh, actually, I felt like I needed to speak to my partner and kind of get her consent and get her on board with this. The thing which gets me excited generally is all the solutions that have come before us have been very single player, when this is a very relational problem, and it can be a very multiplayer game. And I think it's been awful for both sides of the equation. Actually, the experience of women being with a guy who has erection issues and he feels very ashamed of it, quite often given the cold shoulder, they don't know how to help. Like, you can't go and buy him kind of medication or like send him off to therapy. That feels very kind of putting the onus on the guy. So I think coming up with these multiplayer solutions is something that's really exciting for this space and can improve the experience of both people in the relationship.
This is one of those things that I just find so fascinating because we very rarely talk about it, or at least not in depth. And I gave you those statistics on how many men this is affecting, but then think of all the women that this is affecting too. I mean, for every man, you need a partner, and this is affecting them too, which is just incredible to me. You mentioned that these medications, they're sort of these easy fixes, but they don't get down to the root cause of the issue. What does getting down to the root cause actually look like? Like if you're making a pitch to someone who's struggling with this and they're given the option, okay, you can go with Mojo or you can go with this pill that's kind of just going to fix it like that. Why is it that Mojo is more compelling or healthier over the long term for that person?
I mean, the medications work really well. Where they stop working is when you don't feel that confident that one time you've taken the Viagra, you don't feel that confident for some reason, something's thrown you off. And if it doesn't quite work the way you think, you've lost it. You've lost your magic pill. Like you'll actually see that it's working every time and then it starts to deteriorate over time. So it's unlikely for it to work for you on an ongoing basis. The thing for the sound of kind of like really getting down and deep to the root cause makes it sound like it's really hard to access, and maybe I'm make it sound like I'm doing something incredibly complicated. A lot of it is kind of within mental well-being, your kind of mind-body connection. You're really starting to see things like mindfulness are becoming a cornerstone in therapy. I think I can speak definitely from personal experience. I like run around my week working kind of crazy hours and just will feel like my body is buzzing. If I actually stop and think about it, like my hands are buzzing, like I'm absolutely jacked. And I just haven't been in my body probably for the previous few days. I think actually what committing to Mojo looks like is quite a lot of kind of just like self-exploration, really linking up that kind of mind-body experience. And you'll see practices in there like meditation, breath work, all of these kind of things that really get you to think about what's going on for you.
I mean, I find this so interesting because it's basically a reflection of the holistic nature of sex and sexual health. That basically what you're describing is that your ability to perform in the bedroom and your ability to have sex is a function of everything going on in your life. It's not just some vascular issue that's happening in your penis. It has to do with how you're feeling in your head, your relationship with your partner, possibly other things, how things are going on, how things are going at work, maybe how you're eating. I mean, it has to do with literally everything. And the reason that I bring that up is because this is why I find the level of sexlessness in our society so sad. And I'll just bring it up, but I'm sure most of our listeners know this already. But the share of men younger than 30 who have not had sex in the past year has tripled in the past decade or so to 28%. So that means 1 in 3 young men today, they have not had sex in the past year. And to me, that is a reflection, not just that we're, not just that we're not having sex, but we are just deeply unhealthy and sick as a society because, as you mentioned, this all comes from the brain. It almost all comes from the soul too. It's a total reflection of your entire health. So just talk about sexlessness and how that's perhaps, maybe you agree with me that that's possibly the worst thing that we're seeing in our society today.
I think you're totally right. And I do agree. I think it's very convenient for me or us to be able to talk about physical well-being and mental well-being. And now I'm here saying, no, you've got to think about your sexual well-being and kind of trying to compartmentalize them, when the truth is exactly as you say, they're totally intertwined. And I think we lived for millennia in very close-knit tribes, kind of, I think the Robert Dunbar theory of kind of you had 150 people in your world that you knew well, but that seemed like a much happier time. And I guess if we're starting to wonder kind of what is the meaning of life and going off and all of that kind of stuff, I think someone could argue that sex and connection in our relationships are the meaning of life. So the fact that they're in such disarray is very sad.
So just as we wrap up here, imagine we do nothing about this issue of sexlessness, loneliness, sexual dysfunction. Imagine Mojo fails. Imagine no one invests in you. We don't bring attention to the issue. In sum, we just let these trends continue. If that happens, where do you think humanity is headed? What will society look like if we do nothing about this?
I think you can kind of see the beginnings of it already, which is we become very isolated. I think I saw some stats, I think about Germany, and it was showing that for the first time in history, gender is not voting in lockstep, as in their political views are not moving together. Beforehand, socioeconomic, ethnicity, all of those kind of things, they move in lockstep, and gender was one of them. Like your political view would move in lockstep. And I think what you've seen is that that's really separated now, and men and women are not connecting and thinking the same way, and is becoming very kind of hostile and isolated and scary, and the world just becomes a much meaner place.
We have a lot of young men who listen to this podcast. What would be your number one piece of advice for a young man who is struggling with sex, maybe struggling with dating, or just struggling with relationships in general?
The number one piece of advice would just be to speak to a mate. I mean, that's kind of what happened for me with my cousin Xander. It doesn't have to take you down a road of changing your career, but I think if I could wave a magic wand and tell everyone who is struggling with some kind of sexual issue to go out and speak to their 3 closest friends, I wouldn't really have a business to run, to be honest. Like, your friends, if they treat you with kind of the empathy that you deserve, them being your friends, actually a lot of the shame that kind of anchors these issues would be totally gone. So I'm not underestimating how hard that is to do, but I would advise that person speaks to a very close friend.
Speak to a friend. Thank you. Angus Barge is the co-founder and CEO of Mojo. Angus, this was great. Thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ed. That was really fun.